Here we go, 365 Sports on this Monday afternoon. Mark Schipper, Fifth Down College Football, joins us on 365 Sports. Mark, thank you very much for coming back with us on the show. What are your thoughts about where the Big 12 is right now with what Arizona State, Colorado have done? K-State slipped. BYU just slipped. And then there's some teams that seem like they've gotten hot at maybe just the right time to possibly get to a bowl game. And, in fact, Baylor wrapped up a bowl eligibility this past weekend.
Yeah, what's going on, guys? Glad to be back. The Big 12, I think the last time I was on, I said I didn't think the Big 12 was particularly deep with national title contenders, but I said it was a wide league, meaning a lot of tough teams, a lot of tough outs, and programs that could all beat each other up on a given Saturday. So that's what I see going on in the Big 12. I'm looking at the rankings. The Big 12 has 14th, 16th, 21st, and 22nd ranked teams in the AP poll. So you got a group of schools at the top. BYU, Colorado, and ASU, and even Iowa State is still in the hunt. And some of them are going to face off, and then you're going to get a shot in the Big 12 championship game. So, yeah, the BYU game was interesting. They actually statistically outperformed the opponent significantly, and if not for an end-zone interception and some mistakes, they would have beat Kansas. So it was one of those things where BYU was playing with fire for weeks, and they finally got burned. And then Colorado's hot, Arizona State's red hot, and so I see kind of a pile up at the top and an interesting finish upcoming for certain.
How do you delineate the lines between the SEC teams that will probably, there's a good chance they're all going to have 2 losses, right? Like, if A&M beats Texas, everybody in contention for that thing is going to have 2 losses.
Yep. Yeah, well, I think that will be kind of the norm going forward, to be honest, in the SEC in particular and in the Big Ten as well. Such big leagues, such deep leagues, and so many difficult conference games week to week. If a program goes undefeated out of one of those conferences, it will mean they have a symbol, the juggernaut of a football team. So delineating between them, you got to go do the work, I guess. You got to look at who they lost to, by how much, where they played the game, and and then use your eyeballs and figure out which one you think is best going forward. But it's not going to be an easy task. And one thing I am certain about is going forward in this playoff, a league like the SEC is going to get a lot of favorable consideration when it comes to the seeding based on the difficulty of the conference.
Mark, what's your favorite chaos scenario or, I guess, team that could create the most chaos?
Interesting question. Create the most chaos in terms of if they get into the playoff?
Or just the playoff picture, I suppose.
Yeah, the ACC is a really interesting league with SMU, Clemson, and Miami up top. SMU's undefeated. They could win that league in their first year. And if SMU wins the league championship game, there's a chance the ACC only gets a single bid. So if that happens and the G5s get a single bid and the Big 12 gets a single bid, you're going to have a big-time Big Ten SEC face-off. And how many of those teams are going to get in exactly, it's hard to say right now. But, in terms of chaos, it's going to have to be one of those, either G5, Big 12, or ACC school pulling an upset in the first round. And then things will look significantly different in the preceding rounds.
Do you think that when they do the final rankings in, a couple of weeks or so, 2 or 3 weeks, that when they set up the non-4 or the 8 at large, that they will be very careful on who they have them playing against in the first round and also who they would have to play in the second round if they win?
Yeah, I do think so. And, the interesting thing about the first round is those games are going to be on campus. So in terms of who they seed where, it's going to make a huge difference about where that game is going to be played. The team, there's been some kind of joking around about it, about intentionally losing a game to get the 5 seed, because the 5 seed in the playoff will play the 12 seed, which will be the lowest seeded team in the postseason, and they'll get to play at home, in their home stadium. So that's the 5 seed is not necessarily a bad spot to get in this playoff as it's currently structured. But yeah, they're going to pay attention a lot to that, because this is This is a match game, money product as well.
Mm-hmm.
So, the stadiums they play at and what it's going to be like for TV, it's going to be important. So all these things are going to be factors for certain.
What I was thinking of is this. Like, let's say Alabama doesn't win the SEC. They're not projected to win it. Neither is Tennessee or whoever. Let's say Georgia. They're not going to put those guys in the same, like, first or second round matchups, are they?
If they can avoid it, I would say probably not.
Yep. I agree.
Yeah, if it's avoidable, they're going to want to play those games in the later rounds for certain because you don't want to knock out your big money brands early in the playoff. But at the same time, you have to be careful doing that because people aren't dumb. They like to think people are dumb and don't notice this stuff. But if you're totally manipulating your postseason to get matchups you want going forward, that's going to make your product stink a little bit, and it could hurt you in the long run. So I would say to them, be careful about doing that.
Mark, how many coaching jobs do you think will be legitimately open at the end of this season? It feels like we're not heading to a place where there's going to be, some Titan jobs open at all.
Yeah, I have not gone over that in any specificity at this point. I will say, one of the big ones that we thought could have come open was the Florida job, and Billy Napier got an actual vote of confidence, not one of those fake votes of confidence where you're then fired 2 weeks later. So the Florida job is not going to be open. And then Dave Aranda at Baylor, a lot of people thought with the way that season started for the Bears that Baylor was going to be looking for a new coach, and they have totally turned that season around. And now Aranda's definitely coming back. So, I'd have to look over the list to see exactly which jobs are coming open. But a big job doesn't jump to mind. I'll tell you, Oklahoma State is a little bit of an interesting spot, isn't it? I don't think Gundy's on the hot seat, but something is wrong in that program, and he's been there a long time. So that's kind of a program I'm looking at to see what they do to kind of fix the issues.
Mark, here's a question from our chat room from Mike. How does the committee have Miami as the first place team in the ACC when they aren't the first place team?
Great question. This is like the age-old issue with college football and rankings. There's not a uniform, there's not a platform that we put down where everybody ranks based on the same criteria. So, you get people who rank based on what they like and what they think are strengths going forward, and then other people who see it differently. How SMU can be the top team at 6-0. Great question. Why isn't Clemson ahead of Miami? I don't know. So it's as long as we're ranking stuff in college football and people are allowed to use whatever formula they want to do it, you're going to end up with weird stuff like that. I believe in the AP, Georgia is ranked in front of Ole Miss, and Ole Miss just beat Georgia. Yeah. So I don't know. You tell me.
They're also ranked ahead of Alabama, who also beat Georgia. So, they're ranking on losses and not wins right now. It's because Ole Miss has 2 unranked losses, as where, Georgia has 2 ranked losses. That's where it is. It's not
and one on the road against what appears to be the third team.
Yeah. So it's such a very, very strange thing. Do you think that it is a reasonable scenario that the Big 12 gets left out of this thing?
Gets left out completely? No.
Yeah.
No, I don't think so. No, I think if the Big 12 league champion doesn't get in, I think they will almost without question get an at-large bid. I think, we're talking about how you formulate these things and the decisions you make. You couldn't just say, well, we're not leaving the Big 12 out if there isn't a worthy team. But I think whoever comes out of the Big 12 will be a worthy team, and they will get in. So, no, if the Big 12 got left out, I think that would be totally shocking. And I think it would be based on how this season has gone, it would be a terrible way to start this new 12-team playoff to leave out the Big 12.
So, in your opinion, the 12 teams, which will it be, the SEC or the Big 10? If only one conference gets 4, based on what we have right now, will that be the SEC?
Yeah, I think it'll be the SEC because when I'm looking over the list of SEC teams, I think they are going – you talked about ranking on losses and evaluating on losses. I think they are going to have the teams who played the more difficult schedule with the better losses. So when you look at the Big Ten, Indiana, Ohio State's a very interesting game. If Indiana loses that game, there's a good chance Indiana's going to be eliminated based on Indiana's strength of schedule. So, and then if Ohio State loses that game, what do you do with Ohio State? That becomes a much more interesting question too, because they'll now be a 2-loss team. Indiana will have to move ahead of them, et cetera. But I think if I'm guessing right now, I'm going to say it's the SEC just based on overall strength.
Have you ever seen more of a dagger move by a school to fire Tom Herman and bring back the defensive coordinator who he just fired to be the interim?
No, that's pretty savage. I was thinking about Tom Herman today, and man, a few years ago, he seemed to be on a trajectory to the elite echelon of college coaches. And now he's fired again, and as you said, replacing him with a guy that he had already canned. So that's professionally a little bit embarrassing. I'm sure he's been humbled by this situation, and he's probably going to have to start again as an offensive coordinator and rebuild his reputation. I mean, even offensive coordinator would be best case scenario. I think he could get a job like that. But Tom Herman has turned into an interesting story.
I would bet he goes back to the NFL.
He was with the Bears, right?
He was with the Bears. Yeah. I would bet he goes back there and does that. So everything's changed so much.
Well, you had this on your Twitter feed. Herman's decline and fall from Wonder Boy to mid-minus has been precipitous.
Yeah, it's happened fast, hasn't it? I mean, you remember him at Texas just a few years ago, and he was going to bring the Longhorns back to glory, and now here he is, fired mid-season at Florida Atlantic, and the future is in doubt. The NFL idea is interesting. That's a good place to go to cleanse the palate, get a few new ideas, rebuild the Rolodex, the connections a little bit, and then maybe get back to college or make a decision on the future.
Yeah, if Saban was still at Alabama, that would be one of his reclamation projects because he's had a few of them over the years.
Yeah, he would have fit perfectly there in the Saban refurbishment school.
Yeah. Yes. It's Chip and Joe here in Waco and Nick Saban in Tuscaloosa.
College football.
He used to throw some shiplap on those coaches. Mark, any interesting historical stuff you're working on lately? I know that you've got all the stuff on the website that's super interesting, but any nuggets you found recently?
Well, I'm going to have something out this week that I think people will like, which is the early history of the Army Notre Dame series, which is they're going to play this week in New York City. The thing that's well known is this is the 100th anniversary of the famous Grantland Rice lead of the Four Horsemen of Notre Dame, which is one of the great pieces of sports writing we've ever had. It lives on. But I'm going to go back to the beginnings of that series, which started in 1913. It's a very interesting series. There's no reason why Notre Dame and Army should have played each other. It worked out that they did, and it became popular so quickly that it went from being played up on the plain in West Point for a few years down to New York City. They started at Ebbets Field, I believe, which is a smaller venue. Then they moved to the Polo Grounds, and that wasn't quite big enough. And then they ended up at Yankee Stadium. And then, for 2 decades, it was about the biggest rivalry in college football. So I'm going to have some stuff on Army Notre Dame that I think people will like.
Oh, it's amazing. Would that not just throw everything into complete disarray if Army was to win the game?
Well, that would be incredible because it would probably push Notre Dame out, but then it makes the G5 debate much more interesting as well. Army's going to get their shot at Tulane, who just smoked Navy. So, yeah, if Army then beats Tulane and wins the AAC, now you got likely Boise State and Army sitting there, 2 very good teams. So, yeah, I totally agree with that and make it extremely interesting.
Mark, keep doing what you do, man, covering college football like you do. Thanks for your time.
All right, appreciate you guys. Take care.
Fifth Down College Football with us. Mark Schipper, appreciate his time. Been on with us a couple of different times, including today.